Right, let's talk about... Well, we're not going to talk about the Game of Thrones because if you've not seen it, obviously it's not going to mean an awful lot to you. I haven't seen it myself, though clearly it is a phenomenon. But one of the sort of star characters is Jon Snow. He's actually played by an actor called Kit Harington, who gave an interview yesterday to say that he really believes that sexism against males is a growing problem. He's fed up with constant questions about his hair, his six-pack and his love life. He's fed up going to photo shoots and being asked to take his top off. And he says that there are double standards being applied, that there is concern around women being objectified in this way, but that doesn't translate to men. So there is sexism directed at men just the same as women, but it is not appreciated or recognised as a problem in the same way. So that's what he says. And I'm interested to see what our guests this morning think. Talat Yaqoob is a feminist campaigner and founder of the Women 50-50 campaign, also joined this morning by Mike Buchanan, who is the leader of Justice for Men and Boys political party. So good morning, Talat and Mike. Thanks for joining us on a bank holiday Monday. Talat, do you think that Kit Harington has got a point here, that there is sexism being directed at men in the same way as it is at women?
I think his concerns should be listened to. I think if he's uncomfortable, he shouldn't be made to do anything that he feels uncomfortable doing. But I'm really weary of calling it a double standard. Sexism that women face, whether it's in any form of public life or just in everyday, is institutionalised. It's society-wide discrimination. And women in Hollywood or women in public life face it much more strongly than what men do. His concerns should be listened to, but it's not on par with what women are facing.
So how do you define sexism then? Because he did employ that word.
I mean, I guess what I would refer to it as is prejudice, and I think, like I said, his concerns should be listened to. But for me, sexism is institutionalised. It's society-wide discrimination that women face at all levels, or anybody faces at all levels. And if you look at that, it is women that face that more than men. And I think I'd be wary of comparing the two.
Right. Okay, Mike, what do you think?
Well, it's not often I agree with a feminist, but sexism is institutionalised. But it's anti-male sexism, which is institutionalised. It affects males in many ways far more grievously than females, starting with them not being protected against circumcision as babies or children, unlike females, even though both male and female genital mutilation are illegal. I'd like to say, to return to the point of Kit Harington, I'd say to any actor or actress who complains about objectification that they're in the wrong line of work. Both men and women objectify men and women in terms of physical appearance, but women also objectify men in terms of their financial resources. Women still seek partners with more money than them, and that's not going to change.
Right. Well, that may well be the case for some women and for some men. I don't think you can necessarily say it's a societal trend. But we've got lots of things going on here. I mean, Mike, you gave an example there of sexism against men in terms of circumcision. Could you give us some more examples of how you feel that men are actually the victims of sexism?
Of course. In domestic violence, something like 40% of victims of domestic violence are men. But there's virtually no support for them across the UK.
Where are you getting your figures for that, Mike?
From the Crime Survey of England and Wales. It's been known for many years that women are at least as physically as violent towards opposite-sex partners as men. It's been, 300 plus studies tell us that, Kaye.
Well, I mean, I would say that that interpretation is open to dispute, but Mike, clearly it's what you're advancing. But so you think that men are unfairly treated in that paradigm?
Well, in so many, we have in our last election manifesto 20 areas where the human rights of men and boys in the UK are assaulted by the state's actions and inactions, almost always to advantage women and girls. And right. I challenge your
maybe just run through the top 10 headlines of those to give us a sense of it, Mike. I appreciate it'll be more complex than that, but just to give us a flavour.
Of course, education. Almost 30 years ago, O-levels were replaced by GCSEs, with the obvious intent of allowing pro-female bias to result in girls getting higher grades than boys.
Okay, yeah. Well, what else?
In the employment field, there's a huge amount being done to advance women into well-paid into well-paid jobs. Women only shortlist for MPs. Women, all women shortlist in other areas, but also things like female directors of FTSE 350 companies. Although there's very clear evidence that when you drive up the proportion of women on corporate boards, corporate financial performance declines. And I presented that evidence to House of Commons and House of Lords inquiries.
Okay, maybe one more example, and then I'll let Talat respond to this.
Okay, paternity fraud, which is illegal under the 2006 Fraud Act. No woman in the UK has ever been prosecuted by the Crown for paternity fraud, even when that fraud has been evidenced by, for example, the CSA.
And by paternity fraud, just to explain a little bit more what you mean by that, Mike.
Okay, well, there's a couple of types, but the one I'm thinking of in particular is where a woman leads a man to believe that the child is his, so that he'll raise it, perhaps spending 20 years doing so. And even when the Crown has cast iron evidence that a woman's done that, they will not prosecute.
Right. Okay. Well, just some examples. Thank you for that, Mike. And I appreciate that's not an exhaustive list. But the basic argument underlying this, Talat, is that we tend to talk about sexism in terms of something that women are the ones who suffer from most. But Mike contends that actually the reverse is true and it's ignored.
I'm well experienced in Mr. Buchanan's delusion towards feminism. The reality is, of course, that a lot of that, and in fact all of that, can be disputed. The idea that there's female bias towards young girls at school, if you look at any turn, whether you look at the pay gap, whether you look at the fact that 73% of women who actually go into science, technology, engineering and mathematics degrees then do not go into the industry, I think to say that men have experienced the majority of domestic abuse is again wrong. That's not what we see in Scotland. Every 10 minutes a woman reports a domestic abuse incident, and then to say that men do not get support if they do come forward, if they report to domestic abuse, is again wrong. If we focus on just Hollywood, because that's what we've been talking about, the issue of fair pay has been discussed time and time again. The highest paid male actor made £75 million last year. The highest paid female actress made £53 million last year. So whether
and you say that is evidence of sexism.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
I mean, you've got the same thing here. There's a pay gap within Scotland across different levels. I've actually debated this with Mike Buchanan a number of times.
Okay, well, just for the benefit of us who haven't had the benefit of hearing it, Mike, how do you account for those disparities then?
Oh my God, the gender pay gap has been discredited thousands of times. The gap where it exists is the result of men and women going into different lines of work.
Well, let's take the Hollywood examples then, because as Talat said, our starter for this conversation were comments made by Kit Harington. So, I mean, men and women in that industry are highly privileged and earning vast amounts of money, bringing great benefits. But she's right, I think, to say that if you take your big female star and your big male star, then generally women are paid far, far less. How would you account for that?
I've got to say my heart bleeds at a woman earning only $53 million a year.
There's still a disparity. I'm talking about the disparity, not the top line.
The disparities are generally down to supply and demand. I mean, it really is as simple as that. I mean, it's just, it's pathetic to expect, sort of something to come out of a clear blue sky and pay women for things that they don't deserve.
You have to educate me there, Mike. What is pathetic about women getting paid fairly for the work that she does?
Women are paid fairly. There is no evidence.
Actually, there's a lot of evidence, whether we look at from Brussels, from Westminster, from Scottish Parliament.
There is no evidence of women being paid less than men for the same lines of work.
Absolutely,
the same seniority. Women tend to go into different lines of work than men. They avoid things that take a lot of overtime working. They avoid things that take a lot of travelling.
Yes, if I remember correctly, Mike, last time you were on the radio, you said that women get paid less because they work less and they put in less effort, and that wasn't taken very well by the women of Scotland. That's not the case. The reality is that when women do the same work for the same amount of time, they are still paid less. There is a lot of evidence.
It is not the same work. I mean, every year we get this nonsense. Women tend to go into different lines of work than men, And a lot of those areas that women go into, there's a huge surplus of supply of labour. I mean, that is bound to. I mean, if women want to earn all this money, then they should become engineers. And they don't.
Well, I mean, there are complex sets of reasons as to why that happens,
They're
Mike.
complex, but they're understood.
Well, we'll come back to this. We started off talking about the objectification, and I have to say, Talat, I'm looking at this text just in. It's an anonymous text, but it says, "Not good comments from your feminist campaigner. Obviously, it's just as damaging from this guy, or he wouldn't have put his neck on the line." So we're referring to Kit Harington, Jon Snow in Game of Thrones. To say discrimination against one sex is less damaging than another is disgraceful. Any discrimination is wrong and should be condemned equally. This lady demeans her argument by discriminating herself against men. 80295, love to hear your comments on this. We're having a conversation right now sparked by comments by Kit Harington. He's an actor who plays Jon Snow in Game of Thrones. For Game of Thrones fans, I'm sure you are very, very familiar with him. He's a very handsome man. I hope he doesn't mind me saying that. But he's saying that he is really fed up with being objectified, go to photo shoots, being asked to take his top off, all the comments about his hair, his six-pack, etc., etc. And he feels that this is the same kind of sexism to which his female counterparts are also subjected, except it's not taken as seriously in his case. He says that double standards are being applied. Mike Buchanan, leader of Justice for Men and Boys political party, and Talat Yaqoob, who's a feminist campaigner, have got very different takes on this. Talat, you're saying that you cannot equate the two, but I was just, the text that I read out just before that trail saying, you know, you can't discriminate between discrimination, if you like. You know, if it's sexism against women, then it's sexism against men, and you have to treat them equally.
Well, right at the beginning, when I first came on, I said that his concerns should be taken seriously, and the prejudice against him should be taken seriously. At no point, no matter what job it is, whether you're a Hollywood actor or whether you are working in retail, it doesn't matter what you're doing. You should never be made to feel uncomfortable. You should never be made to feel that you've been discriminated against. What I am saying is that there is the institutionalized sexism that women face, particularly when it comes to objectification, is very different to that of men. And there's a really good example online. There's a campaign called the Headless Women of Hollywood, and there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of marketing pictures, adverts, posters of Hollywood films where it is a woman's body. Perhaps you would get her lips and nothing more, and it has nothing to do with the title, but it's objectification of women. It's just there to be sexualized, and that's not something we see of men in the same way. There are instances of it, and of course that's not acceptable, and we should be taking it seriously, but there is a difficulty in comparing the two.
Right, and what impact do you feel that that has?
I mean, it has a huge impact. It has a huge impact on young girls who look at that and see that that is the way women are treated and women are considered in society, whether that's to do with how they feel about their bodies or how they feel that they should be treated by men in return. It has a problem in how we cast women. And we make them the weaker roles in leading Hollywood films. We don't give them the same support to have diverse roles that you'll see men in. At the end of the day, it's how we depict women, and particularly for me, it's how that impacts how boys think about women and how girls think about themselves.
Well, I mean, I know Mike will want to respond to that, but just 1 second, Mike, if I could just, follow up with Talat on that a little bit. Do you think that those negative attitudes, if indeed you do think they're negative attitudes, and I think something Mike said earlier suggests that maybe he doesn't feel the same about it, but do you think it is beginning to seep in with potentially younger men within the industry? If we're talking about the entertainment industry, Kit Harington is 29 years of age. The old, pieces of meat argument, if you like, is it now beginning to spill over into men, and they're being drawn into this kind of negative frame?
I think it might be. I think there's a lot of discussions, and rightly so, about what masculinity means and whether men get to be themselves, and whether we, particularly for me, and it's actually part of the feminist movement where men should be welcome to be part of it because it impacts them too. And specifically, it's about men having space to be carers, having the time to be sensitive, where they get to be emotional, because these are considered feminized qualities. They're considered less than, and that is something that absolutely impacts men. And I think we need to explore what masculinity